Okay, I'd like to just thank everyone for being here and for having me on the panel. When we were arranging this panel, I was asked to speak on two separate issues, both related to intellectual property. One was patent oppositions, and the other was the recommendations of the recent report by the Consultative Expert Working Group. So I'm going to try to wear two hats, 6 minutes each. They're very diverse in their subject matter, so here we go. Patent oppositions, I don't know how much you know about this, the mechanism and how it was used at a particular time when India was bringing in its patent laws in 2005. So what I want to do is just talk quickly about the sort of history up until now and the potential threats that that particular mechanism is facing, and what are the future opportunities in terms of using this tool. So if we look back at 2005, when India was bringing in its laws, and there's been a lot of talk about the issue of using voluntary licenses to improve access. I think if we look at more closely, first line and second line ARVs from India, generic producers, only happen because of patent oppositions. To say that there were voluntary licenses existing before patent oppositions, no. It was only when companies realized that they were not going to get their patents so readily in India that basically they started coming to the table to negotiate. So it's important to understand that this is not just for ARVs, this is a number of other drugs. This is for cancer drugs, hepatitis C, and various others. And simultaneous actions in different countries, in Brazil, in Vietnam, in the US even, have been used to basically bring companies to the table, or where decisions have been used for cross purposes to get better decisions in other countries. Now, the use of this mechanism it's fair to say, hasn't been utilized as much as it should have. That's because people started to fear that it wouldn't actually solve the access crisis, and nobody's saying it would. But it's certainly an important instrument in terms of actually making good negotiations. Now, the threats that the opposition systems are facing, and that many countries have these, but they're never utilized because people don't know about them, or people on the ground are not aware or don't have the capacity to manufacture anyway, so basically why would they use them? But it's certainly something that is becoming more proactively looked at, and certainly as countries are trying to change their laws, it's something that we will look at in the future more too, particularly as licenses don't necessarily give, for example, access in middle-income countries. But the threats that we're facing with, for example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, where the US is asking countries to not have opposition mechanisms before a patent is granted, it's quite ironic because actually the US is actually trying to improve its own laws to improve patent quality. So they're trying to improve their pre-grant opposition mechanisms, yet they're telling other countries, no, you shouldn't have it. And then we have these voluntary licensing mechanisms. Now, while they may help try to improve access, they also potentially threaten the opposition mechanism. For example, the Gilead MPP license, which actually requires the licensee to continue paying royalties until the final decision is issued. So, for example, if I'm a company I successfully oppose, or if I'm civil society and I successfully oppose a patent, and the licensee has to continue paying those royalties until the final appeal, or it has to get out of the license. And the likelihood of that happening when you enter a commercial transaction is less than 50%. And what are the future opportunities? Well, a lot of people think, well, the new molecules which are coming out, the new pipeline ARVs, they're going to be, they're just new, it's hard to challenge them. Well, if you look more closely and you look at the actual agreements that voluntary licenses are being entered in for example, cobicistat, GS7340, a number of fixed dose combinations, all these are very weak patents. They are actually redefining existing compounds with slight modifications, yet they're being passed off as new molecular entities. It actually shocks me to think that this is the kind of innovation that's going on, and that basically we are also pushing through licenses and promoting. For example, cobicistat is essentially ritonavir, and yet we are pushing a whole new 20-year exclusivity through licenses for something that's going off patent in 2016. So I just want you to think about that as a strategy. So there is potential to use the opposition mechanisms, but it has to be used with other mechanisms too. But you can only use oppositions provided they are not eroded by other interventions. And I think that's where civil society and other groups looking to try and improve access have to work more closely together to actually understand each other better in terms of the strategies that are being used. Okay, I'm going to flip hats now, and I'm going to talk about the, well, more of the future in terms of how can we improve innovation, R&D. I don't know if any of you know that recently there was a report that was released by the World Health Organization, which was it took recommendations on how it could actually improve research and development and financing for countries, developing countries, and actually sort of create priority settings for interventions for type 1, type 2, and type 3 diseases. Now, this all came out of the World Health Assembly in 2003, a resolution there to establish a consultative expert working group on R&D and financing and coordination. The report is some 220 pages. It's online, but I just want to give you a quick snapshot of the recommendations that the committee came up with. And there were actually 6 ideas that were sort of that they felt which should be used to actually improve R&D and innovation and financing. So we have a treaty and a global framework on R&D, which is to make more transparent, more participative, effective governance over R&D, in order particularly for priority setting for developing countries, and also a fund allocation for enhanced R&D effects. And it requires member states to actually negotiate this framework. So yeah, it's just like a bit like the WHO Tobacco Convention is the idea behind it. And the key principle, which Brooke has already mentioned, is to actually de-link the prices of medicines from R&D, which is a common problem in the current intellectual property regime that we exist in. And then you have open approaches to R&D innovation, which is flexible use of IP to minimize the barriers, so more open sharing of R&D, of clinical data. You have pooled funds, where indirect taxes are levied on products and services, or national services, assessing the needs for priority setting. Many of these proposals which have been recommended, they very overlap. You have direct grants to small companies, something modeled on the US Small Business Innovation Research Initiative, where the NIH gives small grants to small, medium enterprises to carry on, to progress discoveries through phase 1, which may otherwise not happen. You have milestone prizes, where basically if a certain R&D initiative is reached, then they get there's a prize for that, or end prizes. And you also have patent pools, which we've talked about briefly today. Now, many of these ideas are in their very raw form. They're just basically basic principles, which I think we would all agree with in this room, that is what's needed to revamp the R&D and innovation space in health and access, particularly public health. The problem that is going forward is how these frameworks are negotiated, because they're going to involve a lot of parties. It's going to mean a lot of legwork. Some of the proposals are overly ambitious and will not look particularly like the way they were proposed. I think also it's important that we actually encourage more cost-benefit analysis and do more rigor in the proposals that have been made. I think lessons learned from the patent pool implementation show us that we need to actually understand what it is that we're bringing in. What are the cost-benefit analyses versus other strategies that we're using? I think we all agree that these proposals to improve R&D are necessary, but we also need to understand how does it shape up according to what we already have. I think it's easy to make great ideas, but it's important to actually understand what those ideas mean in practice. So I'm going to leave that there, and I'm sure there'll be further discussion on those points. Thank you.